Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Indie Grounds podcast. Again, I want to give a huge shout out to all of you listeners, all of you that write comments. I really, really appreciate it because I love talking about music and specifically indie music. And this week, I decided to take a little bit different of a route. It still is going to be, I guess you could say, an indie band, but this week we're going to be talking about a song, an indie song. And initially I wasn't going to talk about this song, or I hadn't really thought about this song until it came up one time on a playlist that I had, actually not too long ago. And I thought about it and I said, you know what? This would actually be a really cool song to talk about. Now, the song is called The Impression That I Get by the Mighty Mighty Bosstones. Now, maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. You probably have heard of this song, though. And if you haven't, man, I really hope you go listen to it because it is such a good song. But before I actually get to the song itself, I need to set the scene to show where this band was coming from and why the song was important and the history behind it and kind of why I decided to include it in the indie group. So the Mighty Mighty Bosstones were a punk ska band. So they originated in the 90s. So now kind of rewind time. You need to go back to the 90s. Ska and punk rock was huge at the time. You know, so many bands were starting to really experiment in that sound, especially rock and roll. You know, this was kind of right before the grunge era, so rock and roll kind of was entering into this new period where it didn't really know what it was doing. You know, we had left the 80s, now the 90s were here, and then all of a sudden, you know, reggae started to get big, so then that started to fuse, and that started to produce ska music, and then punk rock was still going, and punk rock started to think, hey, this would actually be a really cool idea if we merged punk rock and ska together. So that's where the Mighty Mighty Bosstones were born. And back then, punk rock bands really were not interested in trying to gain popularity, which is why I wanted to include them in kind of these indie groups and artists. Because it was almost seen as a bad thing. You know, punk is seen as you rebel against all of these, you know, major music albums and so on and so forth, and you stick to your fans and you stick to like the smaller labels. And that's where Mighty Mighty Bosstones had their viewpoint was they saw themselves as punk bands and making punk music, and so they kind of kept a low profile until not that long before they wrote the song, The Impression That I Get. They actually made another hit song before this called Where'd You Go? And in fact, if you have ever seen the movie Clueless, they are that house party band that is seen on that movie. And in fact, that movie appearance was a big reason of why Mighty Mighty Bosstones even gained a lot of popularity. So that's kind of the backup, the history of the song, where they kind of found themselves at that time. So the story of the song itself. So the song itself, The Impression That I Get, one great thing that I love about, you know, 90s punk and 90s ska is you kind of seem like you got this simple kind of punk song, but the lyrics would be extremely deep. You know, it would almost wouldn't match what you were listening to. Almost. And in fact, it reminds me of another song that I want to review later on this channel as well, called All My Best Friends Are Metalheads by the band Less Than Jake. It's something very similar where, you know, you're listening and you're kind of nodding your head along to the nice kind of reggae style beat that the song has and ska beat that the song has. A lot of musicians know the unique way that ska and reggae guitar players strum their guitar during their song. You know, that quick kind of up and down movement kind of gets the rhythm going really nicely. But then if you stop and you actually listen to what the singer is saying, it's extremely deep lyrics. And the reason why they had such deep lyrics behind the song is because their bass player had come home one day from a friend of his sadly passing away. And he sat down with the lead singer of Mighty Mighty Bosstones, and both of them got to talking about, kind of how fragile life is, how quickly things can turn, and they decided to write a song about it. And so the opening line of the song, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the opening line of the song is, "Have you ever been close to tragedy or been close to folks who have? Have you ever felt the pain so powerful, so heavy you collapse?" And then the singer actually pauses and he says, "No." And then they belt out the chorus of the song, because the irony of this song is it's almost told from the perspective of somebody who has not done anything kind of spectacular or noteworthy with their life, and now kind of pondering on the subject of death, they kind of come to this odd realization. They're kind of sad that they're missing out maybe on living and kind of experiencing these extremes of life, but then he also, the kind of told from the perspective of this person in the song, he also is happy that nothing crazy has happened to him in this life because he's still alive. Because the chorus goes, "I've never had to knock on wood, but I met someone who has, and it makes me wonder if I could." So you can kind of see the inner dialogue that's going on from the story told of the person in the song, where they're really kind of straddling the fence, where they're wondering, should I kind of try something more with my life? Should I not? Should I put in a risk? And then what's funny is during the second verse, it goes right back to that voice of kind of like daring again, where it goes to, "Have you ever had the odds stacked up so high you needed strength ones don't possess? Or has it ever come down to do or die? You got to rise above the rest." And then it goes right back to the chorus again. And everything is kind of put together perfectly by the bridge, where I think it's pretty much told from the point of the same person telling the song, where he says, "I'm not a coward, I've just never been tested, and I like to think if I was, I would pass." So the song kind of ends up with him having this confidence in himself that he's ready to kind of face the world and ready to take on a risk and a challenge. It's such an awesome song when you think about it. It really, really is. And again, it was told from kind of that morbid curiosity, of kind of like reflecting on your life after like a tragic event. But back then, when albums were released, sometimes they were not released with lead singles. And this was the case of the Mighty Mighty Bosstones. Of course, it eventually became, just due to popularity, it became one of their most, if not the most popular song that they have ever done. And it reached not the main Billboard charts, but the rock charts, especially in the USA, but also overseas as well. It got a lot of notoriety. And it was featured on a lot of films, on some TV shows as well, ever since then. And what's interesting is the lead singer of the Mighty Mighty Bosstones actually said that part of the reason why they didn't get more popular after this song was released was because he was almost petrified of keeping that punk rock label. And he had said that he was afraid that if they kind of toured more or kind of pushed more to have the song, reach more and more audiences, that essentially they would lose kind of that punk rock persona that was so prevalent back then. And it's funny because now, he looks back and he says, it was kind of silly, trying to kind of hold on to that image. And I think he kind of regrets them doing that now. Like, he kind of wishes they would have went for it and maybe gotten even bigger as a band. But that's essentially it for the song itself. Like I said, if you break down the music of the song, you have that fast strumming, like I mentioned earlier, of the guitar, of that reggae and ska, strumming style. You have nice, easy, breezy drums that are behind it. But then you have an amazing brass section, that they have. Of course, you got to throw in the horn section if you got reggae. What's really, really cool about the Mighty Mighty Bosstones too, and you can see this in the music video, is they almost have a hype man as well, where literally his only job in the band is to just dance and kind of get the band and the crowd hyped. It's such an awesome thing to see. I highly recommend watching it. But as regards the Mighty Mighty Bosstones themselves, that's essentially pretty much when they peaked. They didn't really do too much afterwards. They did tour for a little while, and then they broke up, and then I think a few years passed, and then they did regroup again, but kind of like, they kind of regrouped in the sense of, yeah, they released new singles and they released new songs, but they kind of knew that, they were pretty much past their prime at that point. And then actually in 2022, the band disbanded completely. So they are no longer a band anymore. But, doesn't take away from the song itself, the impression that I get. Please listen to it if you haven't. And that is all for me for this week's episode. Take care, everybody. And I can't wait to talk again next week about our next subject. See you then.